Hi guys, my name is Nadine Zapata, and this is my presentation for this week. So first we're going to talk about the 10th Amendment, and the 10th Amendment means to me that the federal government only has the powers specifically listed in the Constitution, and that all the other powers are reserved for the state governments or the public. And then on page 67 of the textbook, the second paragraph, it talks about how it was intended to provide assurance to people about their rights. Okay, and then one thing from the YouTube video that stuck out to me was when he said about our parents being delegated certain powers, and then we had certain powers, right? So I think that kind of correlates because our parents, they choose, right, what we eat for dinner, where we go for vacations, but then other stuff that they don't decide that we do. So our parents would be the federal government, and then we would be the state government or the public, right? We choose like what I would wear every day, what decorations I can have in my room, right? So I really like how that ties together. And then for express powers, it means to me that there are powers that are granted to the U.S. federal government by the Constitution. Okay, and then in the textbook on page 495, it states, the Constitution allocated more power to the federal government by effectively adding two new branches, a president to head the executive branch and the Supreme Court to head the judicial branch. The specific delegated or express powers granted to Congress and to the president were clearly spelled out in the body of the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, which was something that was really interesting to me. Okay, and then next would be implied powers. And implied powers are powers that are not really stated boldly in the Constitution, but they are very necessary. So on page 392, it states that laws that regulate banks, establish a minimum wage, and allow for construction and maintenance of interstate highways are possible because of the implied powers granted by the necessary and proper clause. So to me, in simpler terms, it's more like things that aren't really stated or written in red that need a bright attraction to it, but it is something more behind the scenes that needs to happen, if that makes sense. Okay, now for the supremacy clause. This means that if a state law contradicts a federal law, the federal law wins and the state law is voided. So also on page 495, it states, this clause, better known as the supremacy clause, makes clear that any conflict in law between the central government and the regional government is typically resolved in favor of the central government. And in the YouTube video, it talks about the oath qualification, which actually really stood out to me. And then for elastic clause, the elastic clause kind of gives Congress the power to make laws, but they have to be needed to carry out. And then on page 80 of the textbook, it says, the necessary and proper clause enables Congress to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying. And then I like how in the YouTube video, he said how Hamilton argued that the elastic clause gave the government that corresponding power to create a national bank to execute that foregoing power. And I actually thought that was pretty cool. Okay, and now for regulatory laws. Regulatory laws comes from legislative statutes that grant specific administrative agencies the authority to create detailed rules. And then regulatory laws enforced by some things, like inspections or monitoring any actions. These agencies are created by Congress, which give them kind of the authority